Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from Germany. It is a story about three sisters and how they got the best of an evil wizard. This is the story of Fitcher's bird. Once long ago in Cologne, there was a widower, and he had three very pretty daughters. The eldest was Gretchen, and then was Gretel, and the youngest was Erna. And the three girls worked very hard from dawn to dusk because they had to in order to help their father and to keep the house clean and take care of everything and get enough money and things to earn a little, extra so they could buy food and that sort of thing. Near Cologne, but not inside the city, of course, there also lived a great enchanter. He was evil and he was wicked. And somehow, no one ever really knew how, he would come to town every few days or so, dressed as a beggar, and he would go about the town begging for a crust of bread. And somehow, every time he would leave the village, one of the girls from the town would have gone missing, and she would never be seen again. And nobody quite knew how he did it, but they knew that those girls were probably going with the old wizard. Well, one day, the old wizard came to town, dressed in his gray beggar's rags, all wrapped around him, around his feet and around his back, and over his head a gray little cap. And he began begging at doors, and he knocked on the widower's door. And the widower's oldest daughter, Gretchen, answered the door. And Gretchen said to him, "What can I do for you, my friend?" And he said, "Well, could I possibly get a crust of bread? I'm very hungry." And so she went to the kitchen and she fetched him a crust of bread. And when she came back, he was holding out a leather bag in front of him, a rather large leather bag. And she offered him the crust of bread, and he said, "Well, thank you kindly." And then he touched her hand, and will she, nil she must jump into the leather sack. And the old wizard took it up, and he threw it on his back, and he started to trot out of town with it. And if anyone had paid any attention, they would have seen that he walked a little oddly, as though he were walking on his tiptoes the whole time, almost as if he had hooves, not feet. But no one was paying that much attention to an old beggar with a sack thrown over his back, and so he trotted out of town and down the road. And before too long he got to a dark forest, and he trotted through the forest, and in the middle of the forest, in the darkest part of it, he came to a very large mansion made of dark wood, and there he stopped, and he opened the sack. And out popped Gretchen. Well, she was a little frightened, but this was a very grand house she was seeing here. And when she turned to look at the beggar man who had stolen her away, she found that he had thrown off his gray rags, and he was wearing a very beautiful black velvet suit with silver buttons and golden embroidery. And he looked very rich. Not very handsome, for if you looked closely, you could see that his face was quite old and wrinkled, and when he smiled, it very much resembled a snake, and you did not want to get too close to him, for he smelled dark and dank of evil deeds. But he was wearing very rich clothing, and his house was very grand, with many turrets and big door, just one door, a very big door, and lots of windows. And so Gretchen looked at the house, and she looked at the man, and he said, "You have come here to this house to be my servant, and this house, all of this house, it will be yours to rule. You will be the housekeeper, and you will make everything grand. And if you do as I say, your life shall be very wonderful." Well, Gretchen thought about that for a few moments. Back home, she had worked hard from dawn to dusk, and she had not really gotten much money for it. But here was this man. He was not a very handsome one, but he was clearly very rich. and he was going to make her his housekeeper, which meant that while she would have to do some work, she would not have to work nearly as hard, and she was going to earn some money into the bargain and would live in this grand house. Yes, she thought she could do that quite well, and so she agreed to come and be the housekeeper for the old wizard. And so he took her into the house. He was very pleased. And he took her into the house, and he took her to the first room, and he took a large ring of keys from his pocket. And he gave her an empty ring, and he took one key off the ring, and he said, "Now open the door, my girl." And she opened the door and went inside, and she saw the beautiful things in the room. And he told her to put that key on her new key ring. And then he took her to the next room, and he gave her another key, and he said, "Open the door, my girl." And she opened the door and went inside and saw the beautiful things in the room, and she put that key on her key ring. And so it went on to more and more rooms full of beautiful things and more beautiful things and even more beautiful things. And it was a grand house, until they got down to just the one last key on the old wizard's key ring. It was a very small key, and it was stained and it was spotted. And there was one door left at the very end of the hall. And it was rather a small door, not small that someone would have to bend down to go through it, but all of the other doors had been grand, big doors, and this was just a normal-sized door, and it didn't look very fancy. And so the old devil took that last key off of his key ring, and he said, "Now, Gretchen, this door you must never open. You must never use this key." And he gave her the key to put on her key ring. And she said, "Well, all right then, master, I will not open that door. I will simply leave the key on my key ring, and I will never use it." And he said, "That is well, but that is what I wish you to do. Now, I have some business to attend to, but I have one more thing for you before I go." And he took her down the hall, and he handed her a very large white egg. It was so white, it looked like a pearl. It was so beautiful white. And he said to her, "Now, I wish you to take care of this egg and be very extra careful with it. If you do not take extra care with this egg, things will not go well for you." "Well, I will take extra good care of it then, master," she said, as she cradled it in her arms. And he said, "Very well then. I need to go about my business. I shall return in a few days." So Gretchen said, "Well, goodbye then, master. Goodbye. Good luck on your business." And off the old wizard went. And Gretchen went, and she wandered about the house for a while, carrying the egg with her and enjoying all of the pretty things. And then she got a bit hungry, so she went to the dining room, and she said, "Well, I wish I had some dinner to eat." And suddenly, invisible hands began to bring food to the table, and she was served by these invisible servants. And she had the most delicious dinner, and then she went upstairs to the most comfortable, soft bed she had ever slept in, and she had a good night's sleep. Well, the next morning when she woke up, she went downstairs, and taking the egg with her and the big ring of keys, and she went downstairs and she had a delicious breakfast served by the invisible servants. And then she wandered through the house again, examining all of the beautiful things. But in the back of her mind, her curiosity was growing. She wondered what on earth could be in that last little room that her master would not wish her to see. Perhaps be the most beautiful thing of all. And she thought about it, and she thought about it, and she thought about it for so long that she decided she needed to know what was in that room. Her curiosity got the better of her good sense. And so, taking the egg with her in her arms, she went down the hall, and she found that little stained key on her key ring, and she opened the door. Now, when she pushed the door open, it was rather dark in the room. There was just a little bit of light coming through a few slitted windows, and the room smelled dark and dank and of evil things, just like her master did. But by the little bit of light in the middle of that was coming into the room, she could see that in the middle of the room there was a big wooden tub. And so she went over to see what was in that tub. What she saw in the tub made her scream and cry out and throw up her hands in the air, for what was in that tub was a lot of blood and a lot of cut up bodies of young girls staring up at her dead. Well, unfortunately, when she threw her arms up in the air, the egg she had been carrying so carefully in her arms landed in the tub full of blood. And although she grabbed it very quickly and pulled it out, it was covered in red blood. And she took it very quickly. She left the room and she locked the door and she ran to the kitchens and she washed that egg as much as she possibly could and as carefully as she could. And she cleaned it with everything she could think of, but there was nothing that would clean off the blood that was on that egg. And when the old wizard came back the next day, he found, when he called for Gretchen and asked her to bring him the egg that he had left with her, she brought him the egg, and he said, "Oh, Gretchen, you went into the room against my will, and now you will go into it against yours." And he took her by her hair, and he dragged her down the hallway, and he chopped her body up, and he threw it in the tub. And the next morning, the old wizard dressed himself up in his beggar's rags, and he went off to Cologne again. And he knocked on the widower's door again, and he asked for a little crust of bread. And this time, Gretel answered the door, and Gretel went and fetched him a piece of bread, and will-she-nil-she, when he tapped her hand, she must jump in the sack. And if anyone had been paying attention when he left the town, they would have noticed that the beggar man never took off his hat, as though he were trying to cover some horns on the top of his head. But no one was paying attention. And when the old wizard got back to the middle of the forest and his grand house in the middle of the dark wood, he let Gretel out of the sack, and everything happened to her just as it had happened to her sister. Egg, keys, bloody room, everything. Her curiosity overcame her good sense, and when the wizard returned, her life too was forfeit. So the very next day, the old wizard dressed himself up again and went back to Cologne. And this time, when he knocked on the widower's door, of course, his last daughter came to the door, Erna. Now, Erna was the youngest girl, but Erna, while she was just as handsome and as smart and as cautious as her sisters, she was also just a little bit sly, a little tricksy sometimes. But she was kind, and when the old beggar man asked for a bit of bread, she brought him a bit of bread, and he tapped her on the hand, and will-she-nil-she, she must jump into his sack. And he carried her off to the middle of the woods, and when they arrived in the woods, he took her out of the sack, and he gave her the same offer as he had given her sisters, and she accepted as well. And he took her about, and he showed her the rooms, and gave her all the keys, and gave her the giant egg to take care of. And when she watched him walk away, she noticed that the back of his cloak twitched a bit, as though there might be a tail underneath. But she had a grand house to look at, and some very odd things to think about, for while Erna had heard, just as her sisters had, the instructions about the egg and the key, she had not just paid attention to the instructions. She had also paid attention to exactly how the instructions had been given. First, she'd been given all the keys and shown all the rooms, and then told not to open the room with the little key, but then he gave her the little key. And then he said he had to leave, but he gave her the egg to take care of. That was a bit interesting. Well, the next morning, when Erna woke up in the beautiful bed that was softer than any she'd ever had in her life, she lay there for a few moments thinking about that key and the egg and the odd instructions she'd been given. And then she thought, well, the old wizard definitely doesn't do anything without a reason. And he told me to keep this egg safe. I'm not sure why he gave it to me, but I'd better keep it very safe. And so she took her pillow and she carefully pressed it down in the center and set the egg on top of it so that it wouldn't roll off the bed and smash. All right, the egg is going to stay there. I'm going to go have some breakfast, and then I'm going to go look at that mysterious door. There's something about that door. So she had some breakfast, and then she took the little key and she went to the dark room. When she got to the dark room, she looked into the tub and she saw there the bodies of her sisters lying there in pieces. Oh, she felt so sorry for them. And so she took out the pieces of their bodies and she laid them on the floor as if they, were really whole again. And, well, she wasn't terribly surprised to find that when she laid them out on the floor in the right place, the bodies joined up together again and her sisters jumped up, alive and well. And they hugged each other and they kissed each other and they were so happy to see each other again. But, said Erna, we are not out of the fire yet. You must hide and I will come up with some way that we can get rid of that old wizard so that he can't bother anyone ever again. And they did try to take the other bodies of the other girls out of the tub and put them back together, but unfortunately they had been gone too long and it didn't work. So Erna took her sisters and she hid them in her bedroom. And when the wizard returned the next day, he asked Erna for the egg that he had left with her. And she brought the egg and she showed it to him. And he was surprised to find that it was so beautiful and unstained. She said, well, of course it is. You gave it to me and you asked me to take care of it. Why should I not give it back to you exactly the way that you gave it to me? I've been taking care of it as you told me to. Well, said the old wizard, because you have done exactly what I said, you shall be my bride, and because I will be your husband, I will have to do what you wish. And she said, well, that would be all right, I think. She really didn't want to marry him, but he did have a lot of money. And she was trying to think of a way to get her sisters safely away and to get herself safely away as well. She said, well, I really only have one wish. You see, my father is all alone now, for my two sisters have disappeared, and I am here working, and he will need some help. So perhaps, could I send him perhaps a large basket of gold? I think that would help him very much. And the wizard said, well, of course you may. She said, and just so that he knows that I am safe, would you deliver it for me? And not in your beggar's clothes, but just as you are, all rich and handsome in your black velvet and your silver buttons and your gold embroidery. Oh, well, yes, of course, she thinks I'm handsome. I must be handsome. Well, of course I will take it for you myself, my dear. I will do it tomorrow morning. And she said, oh, well, that is wonderful. Now, I have things to do to get ready for the wedding, for it takes a lot of preparation for a wedding, and I do wish to marry you as soon as possible. When can we do that? And he said, well, how about tomorrow when I come back from the city? And she said, well, that would be grand. Now, do we have time to get word to all of your friends? And he said, well, yes, of course. And he gave her a list, and he told her how to get word to all of them about the wedding that was going to be tomorrow. And she said, now, my dear, there are so many things I have to do to get ready. And really, a groom should not see the bride but once before the wedding. And, well, I will give you the basket of gold tomorrow morning. And that will be the one time. So I need to go now. And I will see you tomorrow morning when you come to get the gold. And then I will not see you again until the wedding. And he said, well, that would be fine. And so as soon as the old wizard was gone, Erna got out the biggest basket she could find. And she put her two sisters in the basket and she said, now you have to do something for me. You have to be as still as you possibly can. Do not move for he thinks he will be carrying gold, and gold does not move about like a person does. And if you are very still, he himself will carry you home. And but okay, anytime he tries to put the basket down, you have to cry out, I see you, I see you. And Gretchen and Gretel promised Erna that they will do exactly what she said. And then when you're home, she said, please send some help for me because I'm not sure I can get out of here on my own. And they said they would. And Erna put the two sisters in the basket, and she covered them up entirely with layers and layers and layers of gold coins. And when the old wizard came back in the morning, he was all dressed in his black velvet, his best black velvet suit with the silver buttons and the gold embroidery all over it. And he had a big black plumed hat on his head, giant feathers. And Erna came and she met him at the door of her room, and she said, now, will you keep your word? And he said, I will take this basket. Oh, it's a large basket. But yes, I will take the basket straight to your father's house, my dear. And she said, you're not going to stop on the way and put the basket down anywhere? And he said, well, don't you trust me? And he tried to give her his most trustworthy smile, but it only made him look more like a snake. And Erna said, well, of course I trust you, but I have this special ability, you see, my dear. I can see very, very far. And so if you stop and try to put the basket down, I will see you, for I'm going up to the top tower to get myself all dressed up for the wedding and all pretty and do all my hair and the dress and the veil and all of that sort of thing. And he said, well, I will not stop. I will keep going, I promise you. And she said, all right then. And he took up the basket and he started to walk down the road. And Erna went up to the top tower to get ready for the wedding. Well, carrying that big basket with two great girls in it and all that gold was heavy, hot, sweaty work. And so when the wizard had gotten about halfway back to Cologne, he needed a break. And so he took that basket down off of his shoulder and he started to put it down on the road. But as soon as he set it down on the road, Gretchen cried out, I see you from my window. I see you idling there. I see you. And he said, oh my goodness, it's true. She can actually see me. And he picked up the basket again and he hurried off down the road again. But before he'd gotten halfway to Cologne again, he got tired again, and so he took the basket off his shoulders and he put it down. And then Gretel sang out, I see you from my window. I see you idling there. I see you. And oh, good gracious. And he picked up the basket and he trotted off the rest of the way back to Cologne without stopping because he was afraid she would see him and she would decide not to marry him. And so he hurried up to Cologne and he left the basket at the widower's door, and then he started on his way back. A lot slower than he had been walking on the way there, for now he was quite tired from carrying that heavy basket and so hot from wearing his best clothes while he did it. Well, while he was gone, Erna went up to the top tower and she took the giant egg that she had been taking care of and she set it on a chair with the pillows around it to keep it in place. And she put the veil on top of it and a crown of flowers and some jewelry round about the bottom of it so that it looked like she was wearing a jewelry around her neck. And she set it in the window so that it looked like there was someone sitting at the window looking out the window. And then she went down to the kitchens and she found the big tub of honey. And she dipped herself in the honey so that she was sticky all over and dripping with honey. And then she went to a feather bed and she tore it open and she rolled around in all of the feathers until with all that sticky honey all over her and the feathers all over her, she looked like some kind of great magical bird. And then she started walking down the road away from the house. Well, before she'd gone too far from the house, she came to a crowd of witches and wizards and warlocks who had come for the wedding. all of the wizard's wicked friends had come for his wedding. And they said to her, "Oh, who are you? Are you Fitcher's bird?" Now, everybody in that part of the country knew that Fitcher was the greatest wizard of all. And Erna happened to know that Fitcher was already at the house, for she had seen him arrive before she left. And she thought very quickly, and she said, "Well, yes, I am Fitcher's bird, and I'm going to fetch my master for the wedding. See, the bride is sitting in the tower waiting for everyone." And they all looked up at the tower, and they saw the egg with the veil over the top of it and the crown of flowers on its head, and they had said, "Oh, she's so beautiful," and they waved to the tower. And then they went on to the house and went in for the wedding. And before Erna had gotten about halfway to Cologne, she came across the old wizard himself. And he said, Oh, are you Fitcher's bird?" For everyone knew that the great wizard Fitcher had a bird that he would send out to do his errands for him. And she said, "Oh, yes, I am, and I'm on my way to fetch my master for the wedding." You see, the old wizard didn't recognize her with all that honey and feathers all over her. Her face was all covered up. And he said, "Is the bride ready?" And she said, "Oh, yes, she is. You see, just up there. She's looking out of the window." And he looked up at the window and he said, "Well, I know how much she can see from that window." And he continued on his way to go to the wedding. Well, just after the wizard arrived back at the house, and all of the witches and wizards and warlocks, the evil ones, were sitting in the house, congratulating him on the fact that he was going to get married, and he said he was going to go up and get his bride. Before he could even begin to climb the tower stairs, who should arrive at the house but all the men of Cologne that Gretchen and Gretel had sent out to rescue their sister. And when they heard the crowd of people inside the house, they knew that they must be all of the evil witches and wizards and warlocks. And so they barricaded the door so that they couldn't get out, and they set fire to the giant wooden house, and all of the evil witches and wizards and warlocks in that part of the country were destroyed. As for Erna, she went on home, and after a very long, hot bath to remove all of that sticky honey from herself, she and her two sisters and her father lived very happily to the end of their days with all of the gold coins that had been in the wizard's basket. And that is the story of Fitcher's bird from Germany. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will come back and join us again on Friday at 3 p.m. Central Time. We will have another story for you from here at the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.